associated with Imam as-Sajjad alayhi salam the virtue of bravery. You know, bravery is something that has been associated often with Imam Ali alayhi salam, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, you know, but Imam as-Sajjad was, you know, equally brave given the circumstances that he faced in his own lifetime. He was one who never cower before, you know, the people who wielded the instruments of power. Rather, we saw that, you know, how he was being paraded from town to town and brought before, you know, the authorities, the governor of Kufa, the ruler of that time, Yazid. And how did he respond? With utmost bravery, with utmost courage. We found, you know, for instance, that he had stinging remarks to say to the governor of Kufa, to the extent that, you know, he lost control over himself and wanted him to be executed then and there. And if it wasn't for the intervention of Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam, then he would have, you know, he would have perished right there. But, you know, what did he say to him? He says to Ibn Ziyad, "Do you threaten me with death, O son of Ziyad? Do you not know that dying is custom for us, and martyrdom and honor? Is courage anything but this? Is bravery anything but this?" And then when he was, you know, brought before the court of Yazid, and, you know, we have to look at, you know, who is Yazid? And there was no rule of law. He was the law. And, you know, there was no, you know, media, independence of media. He was the media. You know, what he says goes. What did he say to him? You know, Yazid wanted to kind of ridicule him, and he says, "Praise be to God who killed your father." And Imam alayhi salam looked him eye to eye, you know, with dignity, and he says, "May the curse of Allah fall upon the killers of my father." And again, you know, Yazid, just like Ibn Ziyad, was about to slay the Imam right then and there if it wasn't for the intervention of Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam. Is courage anything but this? You know, the Imam alayhi salam was not cowardly at all. You know, despite the fact that, you know, he was enchained, despite the fact that he was ill, you know, despite all of his tribulations, he was never ever humiliated. And that's something that, you know, we need to also draw lessons from ourselves. Now let's continue this, you know, this saga of the aftermaths of Karbala. You know, we see that, you know, this bravery was exhibited in the physical plane, and obviously it's something that he conquered within himself, but there's also the element of magnanimity. You know, just look at the sheer magnanimity of this great personality, and just put yourselves in his shoes and ask yourselves, would you do the same thing that he had done? So, you know, after what occurred in Karbala, and especially due to the efforts of Imam as-Sajjad alayhi salam and Sayyidah Zainab, and they were the ones who instituted the commemorations that we practice today. You know, tragedy certainly affected their lives, and certainly they cried. But for them, this institution of commemorating the tragedy of Karbala had the purpose of liberation, to instill in, you know, forever thereafter, the victory of the oppressed over the oppressor, never to succumb. Now it's ingrained in human history now. And, you know, this Imam alayhi salam, you know, as a result of, you know, this commemorations and his speeches, and the people started to become aware, and, you know, they started to realize the magnitude of what had occurred, and revolts began to occur, revolt after revolt, turbulence. And we found that in the city of Medina, the city of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, some of these revolts had occurred, and it was even affecting the wielders of power, where, you know, there was that revolt against the Umayyads. Now, one of the people of Medina, one of the notables of Medina, was Marwan ibn Hakam. If you recall, he was the one who had advised the previous governor of Medina to kill Imam Hussein alayhi salam if he did not pay allegiance. You know, he is the one who was that vicious hater of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, who tormented them, you know, who was instigating the people against them. tables had turned. Now, because of the revolt, and because he was in Medina, people recalled his efforts against Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And as a result, he knew that he was a marked man. However, Marwan ibn Hakam had a huge family. Some say that it numbered about 400 people of his children and grandchildren and in his extended family. So fleeing from Medina wasn't an easy task. It's not something that can be done overnight. And he needed to, he felt the need to safeguard his family. And he knocked door to door of the dignitaries of Medina, and all refused him. Guess who accepted? Guess who accepted him? The one whose father was slain, the one whose uncle was slain, the one whose brothers was slain, the one whose nephews and nieces was slain. And this was the magnanimity of Imam as-Sajjad alayhi salam. He says, bring your family, they will be with my family. Can you imagine that? If you had a tormentor, if you had an oppressor, we come from, many of us, especially given the venue, we come from a background that had that tyranny, that had the oppression of, the likes of Saddam. If the henchmen of Saddam and his advisors and those in his government were tormenting you and your family, and the tables turned, and his family were now under threat, would you shelter them? Would you? And here is the Imam who sheltered them, and let's add to that, magnanimity. It's fine to say, okay, you know what, I'll shelter you. But, let's see from the daughter, the very daughter of Marwan ibn Hakam, what did she say? She said that we did not find in our father's house the kindness and love we found with the Imam. Can you imagine that? It's something to say, okay, fine, I'll shelter you. You can come and your children can sleep in the same beds as my children. But for her to say that I did not find the love that I received in the Imam's house as I did in, I did not receive that in my father's house as I did in the Imam's, and that's testimony of magnanimity. Now let's look at, while we're on that topic, the virtue of clemency. And clemency is that ability to control one's anger and to withhold from revenge, especially when you're able, when you have the power to seek revenge. So we find a few stories and narratives to this effect, where once the Imam alayhi salam had a servant, and just as a side note, by the way, that during this unrest there was a great deal of the Imam alayhi salam was still under the watchful eye of the government of that time, and so it was difficult for him or the people who loved him to closely associate. There's always spies and whatnot, and in one sense his hands were tied in terms of an outward ability to let's say revolt. But this is also the wisdom and the intelligence and just the remarkable genius of these great personalities. What did he do? People would not suspect the association of slaves with their masters. He's just a slave. And by the way, at that time, although Islam is one that overturned slavery, it was still something that needed to be phased out generationally. So what the Imam alayhi salam did was that he would go and he would purchase slaves in abundance, and he would have a program whereby a whole year he would keep them, he would educate them. Imagine a crash course. Imagine being homeschooled by the Imam. The benefits of homeschooling are great, but imagine being homeschooled by none other than the Imam alayhi salam. And they were educated, and they were also given the ability to sustain themselves. And then the Imam alayhi salam would also have them come during the Hajj season to serve the Hujjaj, and finally during Ramadan he would set them free. but they were free as independent people who were self-sustained. And not just that, they weren't, you know, the humble, uneducated slaves. They are people of great knowledge now. Respond with utmost bravery, with utmost courage. We found, you know, for instance, that he had stinging remarks to say to the governor of Kufa, to the extent that, you know, he lost control over himself and wanted him to be executed then and there. And if it wasn't for the intervention of Sayyida Zainab alayhi salam, then who did never cower before, you know, the people who wielded the instruments of power. Rather, we saw that, you know, how he was being paraded from town to town and brought before, you know, the authorities, the governor of Kufa, the ruler of that time, Yazid, and how did he would have, you know, he would have perished right there. But, you know, what did he say to him? He says to Ibn Ziyad, "Do you threaten me with death, O son of Ziyad? Do you not know that dying is custom for us, and martyrdom and honor? Is courage anything but this? Is bravery anything but this?" And then when he was, you know, brought before the court of Yazid, associated with Imam as-Sajjad alayhi salam, the virtue of bravery. You know, bravery is something that has been associated often with Imam Ali alayhi salam, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, you know, but Imam as-Sajjad was, you know, equally brave given the circumstances that he faced in his own lifetime. He was one who, and you know, we have to look at, you know, who is Yazid? And there was no rule of law. He was the law. And, you know, there was no, you know, media, independence of media. He was the media. You know, what he says goes. What did he say to him? You know, Yazid wanted to kind of ridicule